Welcome. I'm here in Fairbanks on the ancestral lands of the Dene Athabascans, and Molly is too. She is in my kitchen today, so also welcome to my kitchen. I'm going to hand it over to Molly, and as I said before, if you guys have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Lesley. It is an honor to be here. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who is here joining us on this live Zoom call. And then anyone who might join us later through YouTube, that's wonderful. Today, like Lesley said, I want to share with you a wild Alaskan plant kimchi. Inspired by a kimchi recipe that I've been taught. And so we've got a bit of a mix of Alaskan edible plants and the spices of, actually we're using some Mexican spices. So going down south for some spices to add that heat for a Korean inspired ferment, which is called kimchi. And so before we get started, I would just like us all to just take a deep breath in, let it go, just settle into where you're sitting, where you're standing, where you are in this moment right now. Maybe place your hands on your heart, maybe bring your hands into touch, bring your breath back into your body, another deep breath in. And with this breath, I'd like to thank all of the ancestors, all those who've come before us, all those yet to come, and especially all of the ancestors of my own, those in Tanunuk, Alaska, and County Kerry, Ireland. And also I'd like to acknowledge all the ancestors of this Chena River Valley, the lower Tanana River, and the caretakers, the original caretakers of the land, and the ancestral lands of the Dene and the Dana people. So Koyana, Masi, thank you. And Gamsa Hamnida. Gamsa Hamnida. That is Korean for thank you. And I've been practicing, but I could probably do better. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. And let's get started. So right here on my workstation, I have all sorts of awesome Alaskan plants. The star of the dish, the bulk of the recipe, is going to be young fireweed leaves. And when they're young, they tend to be less bitter, more sweet, and more palatable to most people. So if I were to make a simple salad, I would use young fireweed greens before they go to flower. And that way, the energy is in the leaves and all the medicine and all the nutrients are in the leaves instead of being directed up the stalk into the flowers to bring the flowers to life. So that's the reason why they're a little less bitter, because all of that sweetness that's eventually going to go up into the flowers are actually in the leaves right now. So picked a bunch of young, fresh fireweed last night, and that's going to be the star of the dish. The other second ingredient is spruce tips. So I've got a bunch of spruce tips here, collected those last night as well. I went to a slightly higher elevation up at Esther Dome for all of you in the Fairbanks area. And it's a completely different climate up there. Right. So down here, we've got the Labrador tea in bloom, and up at Esther Dome, it's not in bloom. It's begun to glow. The flowers are ready to burst forth, but they're not in full bloom. And down here at river level, right, because the river is the lowest part of any valley, at river level, we've got wonderful Labrador blooms. And this is Labrador tea, also known as muskeg tea. In the interior by the Denina and the Gwich'in. And we've got these beautiful globe flowers. I don't know if you can see that, but this is what it looks like when it's in bloom. And we can also use the flowers as an edible. This is a musky type of flavor, and we're going to use it as a bit of a miso substitute because the musky flavor mimics umami taste, umami being the sixth taste on top of sour, sweet, salty, and all the others, right? We've got this umami, which is a depth of flavor. And so miso paste, fermented soybean, which we have here, is also an umami flavor. It's also a fermented product. So by using it when we create the kimchi, it's the pre-ferment. Adding it to a ferment, you're going to speed along the process. So when you use just miso in a full portion and don't substitute any of the muskeg tea or Labrador tea for the flavor, then you might find that your fermentation is happening a lot quicker, and you might have to pull it off the shelf and put it in the refrigerator a little bit sooner. So we're going to still use a tiny bit of miso because I do love miso, and honoring the roots, fermented soybeans. Soybeans are an amazing crop, very high in protein. And when you ferment it, it actually changes how the phytoestrogens respond in the body, and your body can assimilate it in a completely different way through the fermentation process. And actually, that's why we're doing this whole talk on fermentation, and why last week we did another conversation and talked about fermentation in the sauerkraut style, because to me, ferments are one of the best ways that we can heal our gut. We can heal our life through food. And when our stomach's feeling upset, when we have abdominal discomfort due to GI distress, that really changes the quality of life. And when we incorporate fermented foods into our diet, we repopulate our gut, our microbiome, with healthy bacteria that are going to help you digest your food better. They're going to help you assimilate nutrients better. Even the nutrients that are in the ferment itself, all of them become more bioavailable through the process of fermentation. So very wonderful process. And now we get to do it with a little more flair, a little bit different than the German style. We're going to go take a little short trip to Korea. And traditionally in Korean kimchi, they use Napa cabbage, which you might be familiar. It's the longer cabbage that looks more like a big romaine lettuce, as opposed to the round green or purple cabbages. So it's a little bit leafier. It has a little bit more moisture in the leaves. They tend to not cut it really small. They'll actually just quarter it lengthwise. So a lot of you can get really big pieces of cabbage where multiple leaves are stuck together. And they make them in huge crocks. I've even heard of families not using their bathtub and actually using their bathtub as the crock to make the kimchi in. So, we're talking like families in New York City, maybe they run Korean restaurant and they're actually making Korean kimchi homemade out of a ceramic tub, which of course is sterile if you sterilize it. So, there's nothing wrong with it, but just the creative ways in which we can find as human beings to make food that is not only healthy and nutritious, but feeds our family, and it feeds our community, and it feeds our soul, because we get to make it with our own two hands. So today, with my own two hands, I'm going to make this. And another thing in talking about the traditional way that Koreans make kimchi is usually at least a couple hours before the process, but sometimes the day before, they will have the Napa cabbage, and then they'll kind of fluff open all of the leaves of the Napa cabbage. And inside, they'll just heavily salt all the leaves, and then put it in a container, close the lid, and put it on a shelf, right? They'll leave that there for, like I said, maybe overnight, maybe at least a couple hours. And just like we talked about in the last video, using salt to do this lactobacillus ferment, we're going to also use salt for the kimchi. So same, but different. And we're going to have the salt, but in the sauerkraut, we salt it as we're making it. So we have a really good grasp on like how much salt we're using. When I've made kimchi in the past in the traditional way, it's hard to know exactly how much salt you're using because you pre-salt the cabbage. And then once it's been salted and sat, you actually rinse all that salt off. And then you cut and prep and continue the process. And so that softens the leaves and it allows the pieces of the cabbage to stay nice and large instead of having to cut it really, really small like we do with sauerkraut. So in that same vein, in that same kind of thought pattern, we have fireweed here. And a lot of people, even though it's young fireweed, people who are maybe used to like butter lettuce or romaine or spinach, you know, they might think of like a leafy green and expect maybe a sweeter, less bitter green. This can be bitter for some people. And so one of the ways that I would prep the bitter greens of fireweed, even after it's floured, so when it's particularly bitter, is, and I'm going to use in a salad, is I would salt it much like we would salt the cabbage for kimchi, but instead I would, measure kind of as I'm going, know how much salt, similar to how I'm making the sauerkraut. And that's what I've done here is I've just kind of roughly broken up the fireweed, loosely placed it in the bowl, just did a slight little dusting of salt, another layer of fireweed, light dusting of salt, and then I just pressed it down this morning. And fireweed isn't known to have a lot of moisture in it, so this helps soften. And by massaging it, manually massaging it, you can use a mortar, the pestle from a mortar and pestle, and to kind of soften up the leaves. And you could use that right in a salad, maybe without the dressing since it's been salted. But for this reason, it's going to help start the process. So very similar, but I'm not going to rinse this off. I'm going to leave the salt here so that we don't waste anything. And then another attribute of kimchi is that they make a paste. So instead of creating the brine from a simple salt and water mixture, right? So either added water or water from the plant itself and salt combined to make the brine. Instead, we're actually going to add some sweet fruit like apple. And apple does grow in Alaska. This apple didn't grow here. This is a pink lady. Pink ladies can grow in Alaska. And in talking about agriculture, there's an orchard association down in Anchorage. I have a cousin who is a part of it and also grafts his own trees. He has a root stock of both crabapple and a chokecherry. And on the crabapple tree, he has about 13 varieties of each branch is a variety of apple. And he even has a Molly apple for me, which is awesome. It looks very similar to Pink Lady and it's also crisp and it grows wonderfully here in Alaska. And then there is on the chokecherry base, because it's a pitted fruit, he can grow some plums and some cherries, and he also grafts that in. So we can grow delicious, edible, sweet apples here in Alaska with planning, foresight, and the knowledge to do so. So although I bought this at the grocery store, this fall I could make the same dish and have Alaskan sweet apple. Then I have some red onion. So I have a whole red onion and I cut it in half. Half of it I sliced and diced into these strips that I'm going to mix into the kimchi. And the rest I'm actually going to dice up and I'm going to put it into this little food processor. So there's my onion in the food processor. And then I'm going to take that apple and I'm going to put that in the food processor as well. So a whole apple and half of a red onion. And we put it in the food processor. with a little bit of the miso. Let's say if I were to make the full batch without any Labrador tea, I would use around a tablespoon of miso mixed with water, about 3 tablespoons, 4 tablespoons of water per tablespoon of miso. Since I'm going to add some extra flavor and muskiness from this tea, we're going to add only a teaspoon of the miso. So the spoon, the most underrated kitchen gadget. I'm going to put that teaspoon in, and then I'm going to add some water, about 4 times. So I added about 4 teaspoons of water to my food processor. And then I have some ginger. And ginger is wonderful because it is a great digestive. You can't grow it here as easily as I would hope, but you can grow it indoors. It's hard to get the rhizome nice and big unless you're really like producing a tree, like a ginger tree of sorts inside your house. But some people have grown it successfully in their greenhouse. It just won't get as big as tropics, but it's kind of a fun experiment to try. And ginger is just so wonderful and warming that adding it to meals helps aid digestion on a whole other level, because it's actually the way that ginger works is it draws blood, it increases circulation. So it draws blood to the area and it allows healing to occur. So it can reduce inflammation. They found it helps athletes recover, endurance athletes especially. So I'm just going to put the lid on, pause for a moment. This is going to make the paste. And then I'm just going to show you what I've done with these spruce tips. So I've got these beautiful, adorable spruce tips, so nice and green. And then I've just loosely chopped them. So nice loose chop. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we kind of want to break up that middle stem. As soft as it is, we want to break it up so that there's not one bite in the kimchi that's very overpowering, right? We want all of the flavors to blend in together. So I put on the cutting board the rest of the spruce tips that I hadn't chopped up loosely. Just going to chop those up. And then for our chilies today, we have 2 different kinds. They're Lesley's chilies, and I asked her to pick her favorite. So we have these 2, and I said my prerequisites for I was like, I want one chili that's kind of like mild, right, and really flavorful, and then I want one chili that's spicier. And it could also be flavorful, but I want some spice. So this first chili, it's a little bit bigger. It's the guajillo chili, and it's like kind of fruity and a little bit sweeter. It's not very spicy. So if like you have family members that don't like spice, or if you're cooking for people who don't like spicy foods, but they like the flavor of spiced dishes, then this guajillo chili is amazing. And then this little one over here, this one is called the puya chili. And it is it's still like that kind of robust, earthy, sweet flavor, but it has that kick of spice. And you can hear the seeds in it, like a little maraca. So you know it's got those extra spicy seeds in there ready to be eaten. So what we did was we broke up some of those, half of the guajillo chili and one of the puyas, and we blended it. We blended it in a dry blender to powder it into this fine powder. And actually, I want to add that directly into my food processor because it blends really nicely that way. So just to double check, I've got my miso, I've got the water to wet it, I've got my apple, got some ginger, my chilies, and the half of an onion. So let us pulse this together. And now is a great time to type in a couple questions. I'm going to pulse this real quick and then show you what the after effect is, the desired outcome for your pulse. Okay, so let me bring this big bowl out. We worked some movie magic and I pre-made this. So this is the consistency that we're looking for, right? If I tilt it too much, it will spill, but it's a bit like chutney, right? It's a little bit, or a salsa, a chutney salsa, a really fine, and definitely there's water around the edges and we want that.
Momentary technical difficulty. We're back to normal. So let's jump in and Molly, when you're ready, we'll ask these questions out loud too. Okay.
Yeah, I want to hear them. I'm ready.
Okay. So we had one question of what would be a good substitute for a different local plant for the fireweed leaves? And
Yeah.
someone answered maybe twisted stalk, maybe dandelion. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So if you didn't get a chance to watch last week's video, I made an entire Alaskan plant-based sauerkraut recipe. And so I used twisted stalk and I used dandelion leaf in that as well as fireweed and some other plants. So if you're interested in hearing kind of a more in-depth talk about twisted stalk, some of the nutrients, as well as in dandelion, definitely please check out that video. We've recorded these and yes, you can use sourdock. I just saw that. Usually I don't see the questions, but I'm close enough that I saw that. Sourdock is pretty sour, right? So you're going to be making a sour creation and it's going to amplify the sourness. So I would use sourdock, but maybe as a spice within, and not maybe the bulk green. So what I would use, so I grew up in the interior and chickweed grows here. So it doesn't grow as affluently, as productively as down in below the Alaska range, but chickweed is awesome. It's also really high in water content. So it's going to make a really nice brine and it works really, really well. So you could do like 75% chickweed and 25% fireweed, or 100% chickweed, or 90% chickweed and 10% dandelion, or any combination of those. These three plants that I'm going to say now, the fireweed, dandelion, and chickweed, they are medicinal plants, and we do use them for medicine. But they're known as pot herbs, which means we eat them as foodstuffs. And it means that even though they're medicinal and nutritious for us, they're mainly nutritious, and their medicinal properties are because they're so nutritious, they're feeding our body so that it can function better. And that leads to better health, right? Better health outcomes if our body is functioning optimally. So that being said, really, using any of the plants that you feel a connection to, do your research. So I'm seeing a cow parsnip. Cow parsnip, you don't eat the leaves, right? They've got that, unless you treat it very carefully. And that's not how I was raised to eat the leaves. We were raised to trim all the leaves off the stalk and then peel the stalk to get the fibers off of the stalk, and then we'd eat the stalk or cook the stalk, have it in soups and things. So to me, cow parsnip or cow parsley is more of a cooked plant, but it doesn't have to be. You can, we munched it raw, like celery sticks, but it's a more it's a very fibrous plant, so you might have to grate it or something, chop it really, really fine so that it actually can ferment. Some of the harder vegetables, the harder the vegetable, the smaller the chop should be so that it can ferment evenly with the rest. And then as far as twisted stock, there isn't really a lot of twisted stock north of the Alaska Range. If you're in this area, in the Yukon, Kuskokwim, Tanana Valley Delta, north of the Alaska Range, there isn't really twisted stock, unfortunately, also known as watermelon berry, but it's also a delicious plant. And of course, before it flowers, before it turns to berry, you can harvest the leaves and eat the leaves and the stems of the twisted stalk. But once it flowers and once it goes to berry, don't eat the greens, just let it go to berry and eat the berries when they come, because they're delicious and the leaves aren't good for you after they've gone to berry. So I wanted to show you this fireweed that I've been holding on to, and it's still a young fireweed, and look at how tall that is. And I actually pulled up the root so you can see it's not a very big root. Fireweed is it's an annual. So it has a very small little root. And from about here, you see that darkening to here, that's the root. And they've done, modern medicine has done some studies, some double-blind studies actually, on benign prostatic hyperplasia. So traditionally, we've used the root of fireweed for men's prostate health. And now Western medicine is starting to use ethnobotanical remedies and test them and see how efficacious, how effective they are in reality to the condition that they're being used for. So when they tested the compounds, actually the tannins specifically in the root of fireweed, they found that it could reduce your risk or reduce, if you already had this BPH or benign prostatic hyperplasia, can help. Some studies have found that it can help. So that's really cool, very promising. I love that they're doing research into Alaska Native plants and ethnobotany in general, because there is a lot of untapped knowledge within these plants that, and I say this in a lot of my classes, but Alaska, we might not have a lot of variety of plants, but what the plants do is amazing. Like, they're super powered, right? They have multiple purposes. They serve so many functions. Dandelion, for instance, yes, use the dandelion leaves, use the dandelion flower. I might not use the root for this particular dish, but I would cook with the root. I would pickle the root, and that would be delicious. And I have, and it is delicious. So the entire dandelion plant is edible. And I believe that dandelion will save the world if there were ever a food crisis. And we've experienced certain moments of food insecurity, right? Not only as a state, but as, as Indigenous peoples, as Alaskans, right? I mean, my mom talks about when, in the 70s, the trucks stopped shipping things in and the stores were completely bare. And then just within my lifetime of the pandemic, and just seeing how reliant we are upon the infrastructure to bring goods into Alaska, if we can find alternatives in our own state, not only is it less of a burden on the entire ecosystem, it's easier for us to enjoy life because we don't have to go as far. We don't have to spend as much. Once these the knowledge base is in place, you really can eat for free. A lot of your meals can be very economical because it grows right outside your door, and you can preserve it in these different ways that we show you, and you can save it into the winter months. So before we cut out to our technical difficulty, I was showing you this consistency of this like kimchi paste that we made using the apple. Sometimes they use Asian pears. That could be a traditional Korean add-on, as well as sometimes they use actual pears like a Bosc pear or anju, any types of pears, just a sweet, starchy fruit, right? That's all they need. And that will help the production of all of that good bacteria. So we're actually going to feed it a little bit more by adding sugar from the apple. And again, it will help speed up the process. So we have our giant mixing bowl where we begin to layer everything together. And yeah, let's start with the onions. So I just dump all the onions in there and a little touch of salt. So I'm just gonna do one little pinch of salt, and I washed my hands. Don't worry, guys. Washed it both before class and on the break. So I'm just actually gonna mix together the salt with the onions. And at first, the onions are dry. The salt is hydrophilic, meaning it attracts the water molecules. So the water actually bursts from the cell wall and it begins to create a brine. And so very quickly, these are now wet onions where I can squeeze, moisture comes out. So that's our first layer. Now I'm going to add a layer of spruce. So spruce is really high. Spruce tips are really high in vitamin C and beta carotene. So usually things high in beta carotene are orange, right? If you think of carrots, or if you think of yams, right? Or sweet potatoes, they are very high in beta carotene as well. And they're orange, right? And some people have a condition where actually the palms of their hands darken orange if they eat too many carrots or too much beta carotene. Well, even though these spruce tips are green, you might notice there's that underlying almost yellow green. And that's that beta carotene kind of presenting itself. And so something I often talk about is the different colors of plants not only can help you identify the plants, but it can also help you identify what that plant is going to be good for, right? So if I see a dark leafy green, and you might already know this because it's been in a lot of health-related media, but dark leafy greens are kind of known to be healthy because of how the anthocyanins attack cancer cells, or some studies have found. So dark leafy vegetables or cruciferous vegetables, even higher in the anthocyanins, right? So that component is really wonderful because we're adding not only nutrients and vitamins and minerals, but we just picked this yesterday. So it hasn't been sitting on some shelf for a week, and it hasn't been transported from the lower 48. This is as fresh as you're going to get. And so now the spruce tips have softened, and I'm going to start cutting up. First, I'm going to clean up my mess a little bit. Very good to clean while we work. And I'm going to, since I just loosely tore these leaves, I'm going to actually bring them to the cutting board, roughly chop them, and place them in the bowl, the mixing bowl, layer by layer, mixing as I go. So as I do this, I'm just going to take another little moment and allow questions to come in. And maybe I didn't answer your question sufficiently, or maybe you have more questions. Please let me know. I'm happy to answer.
Molly, we did have one question about quantity. So I know that you put half of the onion in the blended mix, right, the puree, and you put half the onion in slices in the bowl. How much ginger did you use?
I use, and that's up to your taste. I like a little bit spicier, and ginger has like a deeper spice. So it's going to, like, how it sits in my belly. It's like a spice that warms me here in my belly, low chest, lungs. Whereas like pepper spice tends to get me behind the eyes, in the nostrils, maybe like on the tongue, or like in the throat. So I like a complex depth of flavor. So I'm actually adding the ginger it is a little bit spicy, but it's more for that deep spice layered on top of the other spices, so that we've got this really great profile of flavor. And since I like things spicier, I add a little more ginger. I add like almost my entire thumb size, and I'm talking to the base of the thumb, like full hitchhiker thumb. That was about what I used. Some people only use, the size of their thumbnail. So play with it. Maybe start with a thumbnail size and work up if you know that you're susceptible to spice. But if you know you love spice, maybe try just the appendage part of your thumb. And then if you could go a little spicier, double it up. And then as far as quantities, yes, correct with the whole apple. And we blend the whole apple, because really if we slice, there's no way to slice the apple and have it incorporated in here in a way that's going to ferment well with the consistency of the other plants that I have here. So, but if I were to say have carrots, and I was making a brine and I speared the apple and I pickled the apple with the carrots, I could do that. But this is a different creature in it entirely. So I puree the entire apple, and then I like the color of red onion. I just think it's pretty. So I cut it in half, and I have half in the bowl for some whole pieces that I can see. And then I blend half so that it can be that really strong onion flavor. So often when we talk about Korean food, a lot of people have a connotation of like, oh, that's going to be really garlicky, right? Lots of garlic. And often, yeah, Korean cooking does tend to have a lot of garlic in it. Garlic's a wonderful plant. It's related to onion. That being said, some people have garlic allergies, right? But they're not allergic to onion. So this is a way, I'm making this for a friend who happens to have a garlic allergy, but can have onion, and I'm able to adjust the recipe. But if you can have garlic, you would take those garlic bulbs and plop them right in your food processor and add them directly into the paste. And that would be even more pungent, if you will, very pungent. So I'm going to give a quick mix. And then as far as ratio, it's like when I picked the plants, I don't know exactly how many leaves are on each plant, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to end up with at the end of processing. So it's really hard sometimes for me to know exactly, how much to pick for what I want. So I usually pick just what I need and occasionally a little bit more. But the main rule is to only pick the amount of stuff that you can process that day. So I just made sure I could definitely process everything, even if it was too much to go in today's recipe. We could, anything extra, you could just make extra kimchi, or you can, you can add more water to the paste, more spices. You'd still use just one apple. You'd still use just one onion, right? And just like play with the recipe. And really, these recipes aren't hard and fast rules like you have to do it this way or else it's not going to work. No. This is just a suggestion. This is just a kind of a loose framework for what you could do. And then using this as like loose inspiration, following, the only like hard and fast rule is that the plant material, any solid material, should be under a layer of liquid. Or in this case, it'll be more like a chutney liquid. And as long as it stays underneath it, it stays in an anaerobic environment, meaning no oxygen. We don't want oxygen because that's when the bad bacteria start to grow and it starts to mold. We don't want mold or bad bacteria. And so we check our ferments every single day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day if it's the summer and it's 80 degrees out and your house gets hot. You have to check your ferment, please, because it will bubble up, the gases will expand, the bacteria will reproduce, And slowly it will push the solid material up above the brine line. So we want to burp, as we call it, burp our ferments. So here's our wonderful bowl of our grains. And I didn't forget our awesome muskeg tea, Labrador tea. So this is really high in vitamin C too. And talking about the colors, you know, and the purpose, right? When you look out into the tundra and marshy areas, and you see this, like, it's like a deep, dark forest green, but there's a brown undertone. It's like a brown golden undertone. That's probably Labrador. And then also you might notice that there's like a almost a silvery hue, and that's because it's got these little silvery hairs. So that's Labrador tea in bloom. And I am going to take, this is 4 heads. I'm going to strip the flower and the leaves off. And I'm actually doing it over this so that any of the pollen from the flowers fall in, because that's more flavor. And then I have my Labrador in my hand, and I'm just going to very tightly break it up. Oh, it smells so good. Another thing that Labrador is really good for, it's an antioxidant, it's antimicrobial, it's an antibiotic, it's an anti-inflammatory. It's really quite amazing. And because it's anti-everything, you can use it as a sanitizer. Like, you can wash your hands after you use the restroom out in nature. You can just grab some Labrador tea and, you know, break it up just like I did, and then kind of flick the remnants away. So I used, I think, a pretty good sized portion. It's approximately what I would use to make a big cup of Labrador tea. Right? So it's strong stuff. I don't want to use too much because it will overpower it. And so for our final mixing, we will add our kimchi paste that we made. Plop that right on top. It's like a super thick salad dressing, right? And then we incorporate, we massage this concoction together. And I'm going to stand on my tiptoes so I have better ergonomics, just because I'm a little short. And
Molly, can you talk to us a little bit about how much salt you put in there today?
Yes. So as a general rule, I don't like to go over 2 tablespoons of salt for a bowl of kimchi. I probably used a little bit less. And I didn't put any salt in the puree. So each layer that I made, as I broke up the fireweed, as I was talking about, I broke it up, sprinkled a layer of salt, broke it up, sprinkled. I did about 4 layers, and each little hand grip is about a little less than a teaspoon. So, you know, that's like 5 teaspoons, I'm going to guess. And so that is just under 2 tablespoons, right? Because it would be about 6 or 7 teaspoons for 2 tablespoons. So yeah, just under. But most recipes, like for a head of cabbage, they would say, you know, to write the recipe, they would say, oh, use 2 tablespoons. But I don't like to do that. And the reason I don't like to say a specific amount is because every vegetable you meet is unique, even if it's the exact same vegetable, right? So every vegetable has different water content, was grown in a different area slightly. And so because of that, we really want to allow the individuality of the plant to come through. And I want you to really just like pay attention to the plant. And like, as you add the salt and as you massage your ferment, just like notice like how much moisture, when I add salt and I pick it up and I squeeze it, like, is it dripping? That's good. That's enough salt. do I have to squeeze so hard and no liquid is coming out? That's not enough salt, you know? And then if you find that if you're using all wild greens like I am today, and this is a little bit drier than it would be if I was using like a store-bought cabbage. It just is. It's just a little bit drier. The plants themselves are a little bit drier. And so if I were to if you're home and you realize that it feels dry, but you already added the 2 tablespoons of salt, maybe add just a touch of water, right? Maybe what you need is just a little bit more water to help balance out. And then especially if you're making that puree, maybe you could thin it out a little bit. It doesn't have to be super thick, but it is thicker than a brine. So the brine being a total liquid saline solution. And now this is fully incorporated, and I'm just going to lift up a handful. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but the fireweed has completely changed. It's just a completely different texture. It's really sticky. I'm going to wash my hands, and then I'm going to grab my canning jars, and I'm going to do a countertop canning method where we keep it on our countertop with a cheesecloth covering. I'm going to use paper towel because I actually find that it works better than cheesecloth. And then we're going to check it every day, again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. Today's a sunny day here in Fairbanks, and so we get to enjoy this heat, but we also get to enjoy a quicker ferment. So in the winter, I say the ferment can take anywhere from 5 to 10 days, depending on how hot your house is. In the summer, I say it could be 3 to 5 to 7 days, again, depending on how cool or warm you keep your house. And also don't keep your ferment in direct sunlight. You want to keep it out of the sunlight, on your countertop, not too high, or else you'll forget about it, not too low, again, very easy to forget about, but mainly because the temperature differences, right? We live in this area, right? Like our body, so this is room temperature. When we go on top of cabinets, it's going to be warmer than room temperature. So you're going to have to check that ferment so much quicker. And then if we go lower, it's going to be cooler. So keep it on the countertop out of direct sunlight. Let me wash my hands and grab those jars so I can begin the canning, show you how that goes, and allow some more questions to come in. And real quick, I just wanted to say, I've got some wild irises here. If you're wondering what type of beautiful flower is here next to me. So please type any and all questions and let me wash my hands.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to do a few more of these in the fall, right?
Well, I hope to, but we don't have anything planned yet.
So stay tuned, guys.
I would love to.
So stay tuned, everyone. Keep signing up for those Tribes Extension and Rural Cap emails so that we can remind you when it comes out. But we do have a YouTube channel. We've been putting these on. We've got some on the Cooperative Extension YouTube channel, and we have some on the Rural Cap YouTube channel. So feel free to Google Molly and look back at some of our old classes too.
Thank you, Lesley. So I'm packing them into the jar, and then I'm compressing them. Right? Very similar to the sauerkraut. So as you can see, it's a little bit dry, and I'm having to press really hard. So what I'm going to do, there's just a little bit left. I'm going to put just a little bit of water in this just to wet it. So I've got maybe like a half cup of water here, maybe a little less. I'm just going to mix that up, get all the spices from the side, and then I want to evenly distribute between the 2 jars. Yeah, perfect. And then, as with any good ferment, there should be just a little bit of liquid left on the bottom. And I'm going to top off my jars with that. But first, I'm going to use my fist and I'm going to press down You see all that awesome liquid. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But that's what we want. So I'm going to press all the sides down. I'm a manual person, so I like to use my hands, but they do make all sorts of gadgets these days. That was in my last video. This is our more low-key approach. Okay, so we've got the liquid or the ferment under the brine, and then I'm going to take the rest of this brine and just pour it on top. And then I will show you up close what this looks like. Press it down one more time before I put the cheesecloth on and before we wrap it up. And then just final notes on this being just really high in vitamin C, really high in probiotics, micro, macronutrients, and you know, all of these plants are just growing in abundance up here. So I take a piece of paper towel and I rip it in half, and I take half of it and I wipe the jar and I wipe the whole inside rim so that there's no plant material sitting on top. And it's a clean new paper towel, so we're not introducing any bacteria. Right? Now take the spoon for the final little push because it's nice and strong. And then you can see, I'll bring this over here. You can see how I'm pushing so that the brine, which is this wonderful chili color, because we've added the spicy chilies, and we're pushing the solid plant material underneath the level of the brine. And so as long as it stays under, just like that, you're good to go. And every day you check it and you take off your cheesecloth. We'll keep this on with either the mason jar lid or a rubber band. And yeah, this is the final product. And you can see the purple of the beautiful red onion. I just love it. I just think it's so pretty. And then as it ferments, the chilies will redden a little. So the sauce will get a little more red, more like kimchi that you might find in a Korean restaurant or in the supermarket. And yeah, there are ways you can tie this down, or you can just put a rubber band or a chicken tie, meat tie. So these are our all wild Alaskan greens mixed with some exotic flavors for a Korean inspired kimchi ferment. And I really hope that you try this recipe. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you share it with your friends and family. I am really grateful to be here with you all, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to be here with me. Koyana, Masi, thank you so much, and Gamsahamnida. Gamsahamnida. Thank you, thank you.